When my HOA destroyed my well, I fought back and won. When Meredith Sloan showed up at my door with a clipboard and that fake smile, I had no idea she was about to declare war on me. She called it community standards. I called it harassment. And when they poured concrete into my brand new professionally built well, yes, into my own property, I knew this wasn't just about rules anymore. It was personal. Meredith didn't see my well as an engineering marvel. She saw it as a threat to her control, so she did the only thing she knew how to do, destroy it. But what she didn't know was that I'm not just some guy who builds fancy wells in his backyard. I'm a civil engineer who specializes in water systems for luxury developments. I don't back down from a fight, especially not one where someone tries to erase years of hard work with a dump truck full of cement. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that thinks they're the FBI, stick around. This is the story of how one woman's obsession with control turned into my war for independence, and how I made sure she regretted every decision she made against me. A fresh start in Riverside Heights. 6 months ago, I moved into Riverside Heights, a quiet neighborhood nestled in the foothills of Colorado Springs. After selling my successful consulting startup, I was finally free. No more corporate meetings, no more micromanaging, just peace, space, and the chance to build something truly mine. I bought a $780,000 house in cash, sight unseen. The listing photos look perfect. Modern design, open spaces, surrounded by nature. Exactly what I needed after years of city life. The first thing I decided to do? Build a well. Not just any well. This was going to be my masterpiece. I designed it myself, using everything I'd learned over 8 years as a civil engineer, specializing in sustainable water systems. The well was cleaner than city water, equipped with real-time monitoring, LED lighting, and granite trim that caught the sunlight beautifully. It was functional, eco-friendly, and damn impressive if I do say so myself. Standing next to it with a glass of the purest water I'd ever tasted, I felt like I had finally found my place in the world. That's when Meredith Sloan showed up. The queen bee of Riverside Heights. Meredith Sloan arrived 3 days after I finished the well, carrying a basket filled with expensive cookies and wearing the kind of perfectly applied makeup and designer casual wear that screamed, "I have nothing better to do than judge my neighbors." She introduced herself as the HOA president with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then she started circling my well like it was some kind of alien artifact. "You're an architect?" she asked, clearly impressed despite herself. "Civil engineer," I corrected, pulling out my phone to show her the real-time water quality data. "I design water systems for resorts and luxury developments. This uses advanced filtration technology. The water coming out is 10 times past." I was genuinely excited to share my work with someone, especially a neighbor who seemed interested. But then her expression changed completely. "Oh, that's interesting," she said, her voice taking on a cooler tone. "We really value simplicity here in Riverside Heights. Harmony with the community." "Harmony with nature is good," I replied. "This is sustainable living at its finest." Her smile tightened. "I meant harmony with the community, Mason. We like things to flow smoothly around here." The way she emphasized smoothly sent a warning bell off in my head. But I was still naive enough to think this was just a quirky neighbor who took HOA rules too seriously. As she left, she turned back with that same frozen smile and said, "Oh, Mason, there's an HOA meeting next week. You should definitely attend." Something about the way she said it made me realize this wasn't a friendly invitation, it was a warning. The war begins. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a bland beige room that somehow managed to suck all personality out of the air. I showed up expecting the usual boring discussions about landscaping budgets and mailbox maintenance. Instead, I walked into what felt like a carefully orchestrated ambush. Meredith stood at the front of the room with a thick folder of papers and that same cold smile plastered across her face. Around 20 homeowners sat in uncomfortable silence, avoiding eye contact with me. "Before we discuss our regular business," she announced, "I'm pleased to present some important new community guidelines that were approved last week." My stomach dropped as she began reading off a list of 15 new regulations. Each line felt like a personal attack disguised as community improvement. The lights, the plants, even the well itself, everything was being targeted. The room was dead silent except for Meredith's voice. No one defended me. No one questioned the obvious targeting. They were either afraid or complicit. I stood up trying to keep my voice level. Excuse me, but I need to object to these retroactive regulations. When I purchased my home and built my well, I followed all existing HOA guidelines and obtained proper permits from the county. Creating new rules specifically to target completed projects seems problematic. Meredith's smile widened like a shark sensing blood in the water. I appreciate your concerns, Mason, she said smoothly, but we have to ensure that everything in our community remains safe and appropriate. She paused before saying, appropriate, making it clear that my well was anything but in her mind. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly bothered by what they were witnessing, but too intimidated to speak up. Safe? I couldn't help but raise my voice slightly. I'm a licensed civil engineer with full insurance coverage. This is professional-grade work that exceeds all safety standards. My well system is probably safer than the municipal water supply. I pulled out my phone to show the monitoring data, but Meredith waved her hand dismissively. I don't doubt your expertise, she replied, but regulations exist for everyone's benefit. No one gets special treatment, regardless of their professional background. The way she said professional background made it sound like I was some kind of show-off. These regulations were created after I completed my project, I pressed, feeling my frustration building. This is clearly targeting, and frankly, it feels like harassment. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as Meredith's facade finally cracked just slightly. Her perfect smile faltered for a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Paranoid much, Mason? She said with a little laugh that nobody else joined. We're simply trying to maintain the beautiful, cohesive community that we've all worked so hard to create. Surely you want to be a good neighbor and work with us, not against us? The implied threat in her words was crystal clear. I realized I was dealing with someone who had turned HOA management into her personal kingdom. After everyone filed out, I approached Meredith directly, hoping that a private conversation might help us find some reasonable middle ground. Look, I don't want any trouble, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. I just want to live quietly and work on my projects. Can we find some way to work this out? She gathered her papers slowly, deliberately making me wait for her response, like a supplicant seeking an audience with royalty. Of course we can work it out, Mason, she said finally, her voice dripping with false sweetness. All you have to do is follow the rules like everyone else. It's really quite simple. But these rules didn't exist when I built the well, I said, making one final attempt to appeal to basic fairness. You can't just change the rules retroactively to target one person's property. She looked at me with the kind of condescending expression usually reserved for particularly slow children. The community evolves, Mason, she said. Our standards have to evolve too. I'm sure a smart engineer like you can figure out how to adapt. The way she said adapt made it clear she meant surrender completely. I left that meeting knowing I was in for a fight, but I still believed that reason and documentation would prevail. After all, I had permits, insurance, professional credentials, and a well that was objectively beneficial to the property and the environment. How wrong I was. The harassment campaign. That night, I found the first violation notice taped to my front door. Violation, unauthorized electronic decoration, visible from street, fine, $75 per day until corrected. They were targeting my solar panel, an environmentally responsible piece of equipment, as decoration. I stared at that bright red notice and realized that Meredith Sloan wasn't interested in reasonable compromise. She wanted total submission. What followed was the most frustrating month of my adult life. Meredith launched a systematic campaign of harassment disguised as community standards enforcement. Every single day brought a new violation notice, each one more ridiculous than the last. They fined me for towels, tomatoes, trash bins. Every small act became a new violation. Meanwhile, my neighbor's holiday lights stayed up all summer, untouched, not a single notice. The pattern became clear quickly. Meredith was walking through my property with a measuring tape and magnifying glass, looking for any possible violation, while completely ignoring identical or worse infringements at other houses. I started documenting everything with photos and timestamps, building a case file that showed the obvious targeting. My neighbor directly across the street had Christmas lights up year-round, violating at least 3 HOA rules, but somehow he never received a single notice. The house next to his had a garden twice the size of mine, with vegetables growing right up to the property line. That was apparently perfectly acceptable. Meanwhile, I was being fined $75 for hanging a single towel to dry and $100 for tomatoes that were technically 6 inches too close to my fence line. By the end of the third week, I had accumulated over $1,200 in fines, all for violations so petty they would have been ignored at any reasonable property. I tried calling the HOA management company, hoping to speak with someone rational. But I was told that all enforcement decisions went through the community president, meaning Meredith had absolute power over my life. I consulted with a local attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. He declined to take my case after receiving a phone call he described as a conversation with someone who understands the local landscape very well. That's when I realized Meredith's network extended far beyond our little community. As the ex-wife of a prominent Denver lawyer, she had connections throughout the legal and business world. People who might normally challenge obvious harassment were suddenly finding reasons to avoid getting involved. It was like watching a masterclass in how to abuse a system designed to maintain community standards. Every day brought new creative interpretations of rules that somehow applied only to my property. And then came the breaking point, the destruction of my well. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling outside my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was road construction or utility work, but as I became more alert, I realized the noise was coming from my own front yard. I threw on clothes and rushed outside. There, parked in my driveway, were 2 concrete trucks. 3 workers in hard hats were already setting up their pumping equipment. Wrapped in plastic sheeting and marked with a bright yellow, "Danger, do not approach" sign, my well looked like a crime scene. "What the hell is going on here?" I shouted, running toward the crew chief, a weathered man in his 50s who looked genuinely sympathetic. He handed me a clipboard full of official-looking documents. "Sorry, sir," he said. "We have orders from the HOA to perform emergency environmental remediation. Your well has been reported as a potential contamination source. We're required to seal it immediately." I scanned the paperwork, seeing phrases like groundwater contamination risk and immediate public health threat. It was all fabricated. I had test results, monitoring data, professional certifications. It was clean, safe, and entirely legal. "This is insane," I said, trying to keep my voice under control. "This well is cleaner than city water. I have documentation proving it exceeds all safety standards." The crew chief shrugged apologetically. "I don't make the decisions. I just follow orders. We've got permits from the county health department and authorization from your HOA board. If you've got a problem with it, you'll need to take it up with them." A county official stepped forward with a clipboard and badge, making everything seem depressingly official. "Actually, sir, when there's a verified public health emergency, we have authority to take immediate action," he explained. "The HOA filed a complaint with documented evidence of contamination risk, and our testing confirmed elevated levels of concerning substances." "What testing?" I demanded. "Nobody has tested my water except me, and I have documentation showing it exceeds all safety standards." The official looked uncomfortable but stuck to his script. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have to err on the side of public safety. You can request a hearing to contest the findings, but the remediation has to proceed immediately." I realized with growing horror that Meredith had somehow manufactured fake test results and convinced county officials that my well posed a genuine threat. The whole thing was a masterpiece of bureaucratic manipulation, using official channels to accomplish what amounted to pure vandalism. The concrete trucks fired up their pumps, and I watched helplessly as they began filling my engineering masterpiece with liquid cement. 25 feet of carefully planned depth disappeared under an avalanche of gray destruction. Then, just as the last of the concrete was being poured, Meredith herself appeared, walking across my lawn with that same sweet smile she had worn during our first meeting. "Oh, Mason, I'm so sorry about all this," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I know how proud you were of your little project, but sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good." I could barely speak through my anger. "You fabricated this entire emergency. You know as well as I do that my well was perfectly safe. This is harassment, pure and simple. Meredith's mask slipped just slightly, revealing a flash of cold calculation. That's a very serious accusation, Mason. I hope you're not suggesting that county health officials would participate in some kind of conspiracy. That sounds almost paranoid. She emphasized the word like she was diagnosing a mental illness. This isn't paranoia, I shot back, still recording. This is reality. And you just made the biggest mistake of your life. The turning point. That night, I sat in my home office staring at the footage I had captured, watching Meredith's performance over and over again. Her words kept echoing in my head. Now you can join the rest of civilized society and use municipal water like a normal person. She thought she had won, that she had broken my spirit and forced me into submission like any other troublesome resident. But Meredith Sloan had made one crucial miscalculation. She had targeted an engineer who understood exactly how systems worked, including the system that kept her perfect little community supplied with water. And now, I was going to turn her own weapon against her, exposing the fraud. I spent the next few days researching municipal water contracts and environmental compliance regulations. That's when I found the golden ticket buried in the fine print of Riverside Heights' service agreement with Colorado Springs. One fake pollution claim, and the city could pull the plug, not maybe, immediately. It was designed to protect the city from liability if a community was found to be misrepresenting environmental conditions or filing fraudulent safety reports. Meredith's fake contamination report wasn't just harassment, it was fraud. And now, I had video proof of her admitting it. I called the Colorado Springs Water Department and asked to speak with someone about reporting a serious violation of their service contract. I need to report fraudulent environmental claims that may have compromised the integrity of your community service agreements, I told the supervisor. And I have video evidence to support my claims. Within 48 hours, everything changed. The tables turn. Thursday morning, every house in Riverside Heights received an official notice. Water service temporarily suspended, pending investigation of contract violations and false reporting. Estimated restoration, pending resolution of investigation. The first phone call came at 7:15 a.m., then another at 7:20. By 8 a.m., my phone was ringing non-stop with panicked neighbors demanding to know why they suddenly had no water for showers, coffee, or basic daily needs. The beautiful irony? I had nothing to do with the decision. I had simply reported documented fraud to the appropriate authorities and let the system work exactly as it was designed. Meredith had used environmental regulations to destroy my property. Now those same regulations were being used to hold the entire community accountable for her deception. Justice served. The emergency HOA meeting that evening was packed. Angry, unwashed residents filled the community center demanding answers. Meredith sat in the front row, pale and shaken, but still trying to maintain her composure and authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice strained, "we're dealing with an unfortunate situation that appears to be the result of a misunderstanding with the city water department. I'm confident we can resolve this quickly once we clarify a few administrative details." She was trying to frame the crisis as a bureaucratic mix-up, something that could be smoothed over with the right phone calls and explanations. But I had other plans. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, laptop and portable projector in hand. Dozens of frustrated eyes followed me. "Actually," I said, connecting my laptop, "there's no misunderstanding. The water was shut off because the city discovered that false environmental reports were filed against my property. That constitutes fraud and violates the community's service contract." I clicked play on the video. There she was, on screen, casually admitting that she paid $500 for a fabricated contamination report, bragging about how easy it was to manipulate county officials, explaining how she destroyed my well to prevent others from thinking they could be independent. When the video ended, the room erupted. People shouted questions, demanded explanations, expressed outrage at being dragged into Meredith's personal vendetta. "You lied to all of us," one neighbor yelled. "My kids couldn't take baths last night because of your fake emergency." Mrs. Peterson stood up, her voice shaking with anger. You made us all accomplices to your harassment campaign. We trusted you to protect our community, and instead you put everyone at risk. Meredith tried desperately to regain control, standing up and raising her hands for quiet. Now let's all calm down and think about this rationally, she said, but her usual authority was gone. I played the video a second time, showing the unedited footage with timestamps and metadata clearly visible. The vote was swift and decisive, 48 votes to remove Meredith as HOA president, with only her voting against it. Finally, the community realized the extent of her deception and manipulation. The fallout. By Friday morning, water service was restored. The city acted fast when confronted with undeniable fraud. Meredith was stripped of her title, her reputation shattered. Within a week, legal ramifications started piling up. The county health department launched an investigation into the false contamination report, which could lead to criminal charges for filing fraudulent government documents. The city water department pursued civil penalties for contract violations and administrative costs. Most importantly for the community, Meredith was required to pay $15,000 in compensation for my destroyed well, plus additional funds to cover legal fees and administrative costs related to the water shutdown. But the financial penalties were nothing compared to the social consequences. Riverside Heights gave her the boot. She had to put her house on the market immediately. Word of her deception spread fast, making it impossible for her to maintain any credibility or authority. Neighbors who had once smiled politely at her morning walks now turned away or glared openly. Charity organizations she had dominated wanted nothing to do with someone exposed as a fraud and a bully. Building something better. I used the compensation money wisely, hiring a professional drilling company to create a new well that was even better than my original design. 30 feet deep, 5-layer filtration, solar-powered backup that could serve multiple households. But instead of keeping this resource to myself, I shared it. I designed the system with multiple access points, allowing my immediate neighbors to connect their own lines for emergency water or simply because they preferred the cleaner, better-tasting well water to the municipal supply. Mrs. Peterson was the first to take advantage of the shared water system. Soon, 2 other families connected as well. What had started as Meredith's attempt to force conformity had actually created a small network of neighbors who were more self-sufficient and connected than ever before. Children played around the new well area, which I landscaped with native Colorado plants and comfortable seating. The space became an informal gathering spot, the exact opposite of the sterile uniformity Meredith had tried to enforce. The investigation into her actions revealed a pattern of abuse that extended far beyond me. Other residents came forward with stories of selective enforcement, retroactive rule changes, and intimidation tactics that had made their lives miserable. The county attorney's office was building a case that could result in serious criminal charges: fraud, harassment, abuse of authority. Meredith's attempts to hire high-powered legal representation were complicated by the fact that even her ex-husband's law firm wanted nothing to do with her case. A new community rises. 6 months later, I was sitting by the new well with Mrs. Peterson and a few other neighbors, watching children play in the gathering dusk. The LED lights created their familiar underwater glow. The hum of the solar-powered filtration system filled the air. "You know," Mrs. Peterson said, "Meredith thought she was protecting property values by keeping everything the same. But this community is worth more now than it ever was when she was in charge." That's sure stuff. She was right. The innovative water system, the collaborative spirit, and the reputation for standing up to bullies had made Riverside Heights an attractive destination for exactly the kind of neighbors you actually want to live around. Property values had increased. More importantly, the quality of life had improved dramatically. People felt free to pursue their own projects without fear of arbitrary punishment or selective enforcement of rules designed to maintain someone else's vision of perfection. I looked up at the stars appearing in the clear Colorado sky and said quietly, "Thanks for the lesson, Meredith. Sometimes the best way to deal with people who try to control everything is to show them what freedom actually looks like. And sometimes the best revenge is building something better than what they tried to destroy." The final lesson: Meredith tried to break me. She thought she could force me into submission with fines, fabricated emergencies, and psychological warfare. But what she didn't understand was that I'm not just an engineer. I'm a problem solver. And when someone tries to take something from me, especially something I built with my own hands, I don't just rebuild, I improve. The shared well system inspired other residents to explore solar panels, community gardens, and other sustainable living initiatives. We accidentally created the kind of forward-thinking, environmentally conscious neighborhood that attracted exactly the kind of neighbors you actually want. Meredith's attempt to force conformity had the opposite effect. She taught me that sometimes the best way to deal with people who try to control everything is to show them what freedom actually looks like. And that sometimes the best revenge is building something better than what they tried to destroy. So if you've ever dealt with an HOA that thinks they're above the law, remember this story. Because sometimes the only way to win is to out-engineer the system they abuse to hurt you. And sometimes the best revenge is turning your pain into progress. If you enjoyed this underdog story, hit subscribe. More madness coming soon.